The Catnappers by PG Wodehouse. Copyright 1974 by PG Wodehouse. This book is read by Frederick Davidson. This book is 190 pages long. The following material appears on the book's back cover. Bertie Wooster and his valet, Jeeves, join the racing set and are embroiled once again in a scheme of Bertie's redoubtable Aunt Dahlia. Two racehorses, Simla and Potato Chip, are favourites in the upcoming contest at Bridmouth-on-Sea. And of course Aunt Dahlia is betting. Now it seems that Potato Chip has fallen in love with a cat that sleeps in his stall, and becomes quite listless if the cat is missing. Naturally, to achieve a certain result, all one has to do is abduct the cat and, Chapter 1. My attention was drawn to the spots on my chest when I was in my bath, singing, if I remember rightly, the Toreador song from the opera Carmen. They were pink in colour, rather like the first faint flush of dawn, and I viewed them with concern. I'm not a fussy man, but I do object to being freckled like a pard, as I once heard Jeeves describe it. A pard, I take it, being something on the order of one of those dogs beginning with D. "Jeeves," I said at the breakfast table, "I've got spots on my chest." "Indeed, sir." "Pink." "Indeed, sir." "I don't like them." "A very understandable prejudice, sir. Might I inquire if they itch?" "Sort of." "I would not advocate scratching them." "I disagree with you. You had to take a firm line with spots. Remember what the poet said." "Sir?" "The poet Ogden Nash, the poem he wrote defending the practice of scratching." "Who was Barbara Frietchie, Jeeves?" "A lady of some prominence in the American War between the States, sir." "A woman of strong character, one you could rely on?" "So I've always understood, sir." "Well, here's what the poet Nash wrote. I'm greatly attached to Barbara Frietchie. I'll bet she's scratched when she was itchy. But I shall not be content with scratching. I shall place myself in the hands of a competent doctor." "A very prudent decision, sir." The trouble was that except for measles when I was just starting out, I've always been so fit that I didn't know any doctors. Then I remembered that my American pal, Tipton Plimsoll, with whom I'd been dining last night to celebrate his betrothal to Veronica, only daughter of Colonel and Lady Hermione Wedge of Blandings Castle, Shropshire, had mentioned one who had once done him a bit of good. I went to the telephone to get his name and address. Tipton did not answer my ring immediately, and when he did, it was to reproach me for waking him at daybreak. But after he'd got this off his chest and I'd turned the conversation to mine, he was most helpful. It was with the information I wanted that I returned to Jeeves. "I've just been talking to Mr. Plimsoll, Jeeves, and everything is straight now. He bids me lose no time in establishing contact with a medico of the name of E. Jimpson Murgatroyd. He says if I want a sunny practitioner who will prod me in the ribs with his stethoscope and tell me an anecdote about two Irishmen named Pat and Mike, and then another about two Scotsmen named Mac and Sandy, E. Jimpson is not my man. But if what I'm after is someone to cure my spots, he unquestionably is, as he knows his spots from A to Z, and has been treating them since he was so high. It seems that Tipton had the same trouble not long ago, and Murgatroyd fixed him up in no time. So, while I'm getting out of these clothes into something more spectacular, will you give him a buzz and make an appointment?" When I had doffed the sweater and flannels in which I had breakfasted, Jeeves informed me that E. Jimpson could see me at 11, and I thanked him and asked him to tell the garage to send the car round at 10:45. "Somewhat earlier than that, sir," he said, "if I might make the suggestion. The traffic. Would it not be better to take a cab?" "No, and I'll tell you why. After I've seen the dock, I thought I might drive down to Brighton and get a spot of sea air. I don't suppose the traffic will be any worse than usual, will it?" "I fear so, sir. A protest march is taking place this morning." "What, again? They seem to have them every hour on the hour these days, don't they?" "They are certainly not infrequent, sir." "Any idea what they're protesting about?" "I could not say, sir. It might be one thing or it might be another. Men are suspicious, prone to discontent. Subjects still loathe the present government." "The poet Nash?" "No, sir, the poet Herrick. Pretty bitter." "Yes, sir." I wonder what they'd done to him to stir him up like that. Probably fined him £5 for failing to abate a smoky chimney. As to that, I have no information, sir. Seated in the old sports model some minutes later and driving to keep my tryst with Egypts and Murgatroyd, I was feeling singularly light-hearted for a man with spots on his chest. It was a beautiful morning, and it wouldn't have taken much to make me sing Tra-la as I bowled along. Then I came abaft of the protest march and found myself becalmed. I leaned back and sat observing the proceedings with a kindly eye. Chapter 2. Whatever these bimbos were protesting about, it was obviously something they were taking to heart, rather. By the time I'd got into their midst, not a few of them had decided that animal cries were insufficient to meet the case, and were saying it with bottles and brickbats, and the police, who were present in considerable numbers, seemed not to be liking it much. It must be rotten being a policeman on these occasions. Anyone who's got a bottle can throw it at you, but if you throw it back, the yell of police brutality goes up, and there are editorials in the papers next day. But the mildest cop can stand only so much, and it seemed to me, for I am pretty shrewd in these matters, that in about another shake of a duck's tail, hell's foundations would be starting to quiver. I hoped nobody would scratch my paint. Leading the procession, I saw with surprise, was a girl I knew. In fact, I'd once asked her to marry me. Her name was Vanessa Cook, and I'd met her at a cocktail party, and such was her radiant beauty that it was only a couple of minutes after I'd brought her a martini and one of those little sausages on sticks that I was saying to myself, "Bertram, this is a good thing, push it along." And in due season I suggested a merger, but apparently I was not the type, and no business resulted. This naturally jarred the Wooster's soul a good deal at the moment, but reviewing the dead past now, I could see that my guardian angel had been on the job all right, and had known what was good for me. I mean, radiant beauty is all very well, but it isn't everything. What sort of a married life would I have had with the little woman perpetually going on protest marches and expecting me to be at her side throwing bottles at the constabulary? It made me shudder to think what I might have let myself in for, if I'd been a shade more fascinating. Taught me a lesson, that did, viz., never to lose faith in your guardian angel, because these guardian angels are no fools. Vanessa Cook was accompanied by a beefy bloke without a hat, in whom I recognized another old acquaintance, O.J. Orlo Porter, to wit, who'd been on the same staircase with me at Oxford. Except for borrowing an occasional cup of sugar from one another and halloing when we met on the stairs, we'd never been really close, he being a prominent figure at the Union, where I was told he made fiery, far-to-the-left speeches, while I was more the sort that is content just to exist beautifully. Nor did we get together in our hours of recreation, for his idea of a good time was to go off with a pair of binoculars and watch birds, a thing that's never appealed to me, and I can't see any percentage in it. If I miss a bird, I wave a friendly hand at it to let it know that I wish it well, but I don't want to crouch behind a bush observing its habits. So, as I say, Orlo Porter was in no sense a buddy of mine, but we had always got on all right, and I still saw him every now and then. Everybody at Oxford had predicted a pretty hot political future for him, but it hadn't got started yet. He was now in the employment of the London and Home Counties Insurance Company, and earned the Daily Bee by talking poor saps, I was one of them, into taking out policies for larger amounts than they would have preferred. Making fiery, far-to-the-left speeches naturally fits a man for selling insurance, enabling him to find the mot juste and enlarging the vocabulary. I, for one, had been corn before his sickle, as the expression is. The bottle-throwing had now reached the height of its fever, and I was becoming more than ever nervous about my paint, when all of a sudden there occurred an incident which took my mind off that subject. The door of the car opened, and what the papers call a well-nourished body, male, leaped in and took a seat beside me. Gave me a bit of a start, I don't mind admitting, the Woosters not being accustomed to this sort of thing so soon after breakfast. I was about to ask to what I was indebted for the honour of this visit, when I saw that what I had drawn was Orlo Porter, and I divined that after the front of the procession had passed from my view, he must have said or done something which London's police force could not overlook, making instant flight a must. His whole demeanour was that of the hart that pants for cooling streams when heated in the chase. Well, you don't get cooling streams in the middle of the metropolis, But there was something I could do to give his morale a shot in the arm. I directed his attention to the Drones Club scarf lying on the seat, at the same time handing him my hat. He put them on, and the rude disguise proved effective. Various rozzers came along, but they were looking for a man without a hat, and he was definitely hatted, so they passed us by. Of course, I was bareheaded, but one look at me was enough to tell them that this polished boulevardier could not possibly be the dubious character they were after. And a few minutes later the crowd had melted. "Drive on, Wooster," said Orla. "Get a move on, blast you!" He spoke irritably, and I remembered that he'd always been an irritable chap. As who would not have been, having to go through life with a name like Orlo, and peddling insurance when he'd hoped to electrify the House of Commons with his molten eloquence? I took no umbrage, accordingly, if umbrage is the thing you take when people start ordering you about, making allowances for his state of mind. I drove on, and he said, "Phew," and removed a bead of perspire from the brow. I hardly knew what to do for the best. He was still panting like a hart, and some fellows, when panting like harts, enjoy telling you all about it, while others prefer a tactful silence. I decided to take a chance. "Spot of trouble?" I said. "Yes. Off in the way during these protest marches? What happened?" "I socked a cop." I could see why he was a bit emotional. Socking cops is a thing that should be done sparingly, if at all. I resumed the quiz. "Any particular reason, or did it just seem a good idea at the time?" He gnashed a tooth or two. He was a red-headed chap, and my experience of the red-headed is that you can always expect high blood pressure from them in times of stress. The first Queen Elizabeth had red hair, and look what she did to Mary, Queen of Scots. "He was arresting the woman I love." I could understand how this might well have annoyed him. I have loved a fair number of women in my time, though it always seems to wear off after a while, and I should probably have drained the bitter cup a bit if I'd seen any of them pinched by the police. What had she done? Well, she was heading the procession with me and shouting a good deal, as always happens on these occasions when the emotions of a generous girl are stirred. He told her to stop shouting. She said this was a free country and she was entitled to shout as much as she pleased. He said not if she was shouting the sort of thing she was shouting, and she called him a Cossack and socked him. Then he arrested her, and I socked him. A pang of pity for the stricken officer passed through me. Orla, as I've said, was well-nourished, and Vanessa was one of those large girls who pack a hefty punch. A cop socked by both of them would have entertained no doubt as to his having been in a fight. But this was not what was occupying my thoughts. At the words, "She was heading the procession with me," I had started visibly. It seemed to me that, coupled with that "woman I love" stuff, they could mean only one thing. "Good Lord," I said, "is Vanessa Cook the woman you love?" "She is." "Nice girl," I said, for there's never any harm in giving the old salve. "And, of course, radiant beauty-wise in the top 10. A moment later I was regretting that I'd pitched it so strong, for the effect on Orla was most unpleasant. His eyes bulged, at the same time flashing as if he were on the verge of making a fiery far-to-the-left speech. "You know her?" he said, and his voice was low and guttural, like that of a bulldog which has attempted to swallow a chump chop and only got it down halfway. I saw that I would do well to watch my step, for it was evident that what I've heard Jeeves call the green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds on was beginning to feel the rush of life beneath its keel. You never know what may happen when the GEM takes over. "And slightly," I said, "very slightly, we just met for a moment at some cocktail party or other." "That was all?" "Yeah, that was all." "You were not, how shall I put it, in any sense intimate?" "Oh, no, simply on good morning, lovely morning, is it not?" terms, if I happened to run into her in the street. "Nothing more?" "Oh, nothing more." I had said the right thing. He went off the boil, and when he next spoke it was without bulldog and chump-chop effects. "You call her a nice girl. That puts in a nutshell my own opinion of her." "And she, I imagine, thinks highly of you." "Correct." "You're engaged, possibly?" "Yes." "Many happy returns." "But we can't get married because of her father." "He objects?" "Strongly." "But surely you don't have to have father's consent in these enlightened days?" A look of pain came into his face, and he writhed like an electric fan. It was plain that my words had touched a sore S. "You do if he's trustee for your money, and you don't make enough at your job to marry on. My Uncle Joe left me enough to get married to 20 girls. He was Vanessa's father's partner in one of those big provision businesses, but I can't touch it because he made old Cook my trustee, and Cook refuses to part." "Why?" "He disapproves of my political views. He says he's no intention of encouraging any damned communists." I think at this juncture I may have looked askance at him a bit. I hadn't realized that that was what he was, and it rather shocked me, because I'm not any too keen on communists. However, he was my guest, so to speak, so I merely said that that must have been unpleasant, and he said, yes, very unpleasant, adding that only Cook's grey hairs had saved him from getting plugged in the eye, which shows that it's not such a bad thing to let your hair go grey. And in addition to disliking my political views, he considers that I've led Vanessa astray. He's heard about her going on these protest marches, and he considers me responsible. But for me, he says, she would never have done such a thing, and that if she ever made herself conspicuous and got her name in the papers, she'd come straight home and stay there. He has a big house in the country with a stable of racehorses, as he can well afford to after his years of grinding the faces of the widow and the orphan. I could have corrected him here, pointing out that you don't grind people's faces by selling them pressed beef and potato chips at a lower price than they would be charged elsewhere. But, as I say, he was my guest, so I refrained. I was conscious of a passing thought that Vanessa Cook would not be remaining long in London now that she'd developed this habit of socking policemen, but I did not share this with Orlo Porter, nor wishing to rub salt into the wound. "But let's not talk about it any more," he said, closing the subject with a bang. "You can drop me anywhere around here. Thanks for the ride." "Don't mention it." "Where are you going?" "Harley Street, to see a doctor. I've got spots on my chest." The effect of this disclosure was rather remarkable. A keen go-getter look came into his face, and I could see that Orlo Porter, the lover, had been put in storage for the time being, his place taken by Orlo Porter, the zealous employee of the London and Home Counties Insurance Company. "Spots?" he said. "Pink," I said. "Pink spots?" he said. "That's serious. You better take out a policy with me." I reminded him that I had already done so. He shook his head. Yes, but that was only for accidents. What you must have now is a life policy, and most fortunately," he said, drawing papers from his pocket like a conjurer taking rabbits from a hat. "I happen to have one on me. Sign here, Wooster," he said, this time producing a fountain pen. And such was his magnetism that I signed there. He registered approval. "You have done the wise thing, Wooster. Whatever the doctor may tell you when you see him, however brief your span of life, it will be a comfort to you to know that your widow and the little ones are provided for. Drop me here, Wooster." I dropped him and drove on to Harley Street. Chapter 3. In spite of being held up by the protest march, I was a bit early for my appointment, and was informed on arrival that the medicine man was tied up for the moment with another gentleman. I took a seat and was flitting idly through the pages of an illustrated London News of the previous December, when the door of E. Jimpson Murgatroyd's private lair opened, and there emerged an elderly character with one of those square empire-building faces, much tanned, as if he was accustomed to sitting out in the sun without his parasol. Seeing me, he drank me in for a while, and then said, "Hello," and conceived my emotion when I recognized him as Major Plank, the explorer and rugby football aficionado, whom I'd last seen at his house in Gloucestershire when he was accusing me of trying to get £5 out of him under false pretences. A groundless charge, I need scarcely say, self being as pure as the driven snow, if not purer. But things had got a bit difficult, and the betting was that they would become difficult now. I sat waiting for him to denounce me, and was wondering what the harvest would be, when he spoke, to my astonishment, in the most bonhomous way, as if we were old buddies. "We've met before. I never forget his face. Isn't your name Allen, or Allenby, or Alexander, or something?" "Wooster," I said, relieved to the core. I had been anticipating a painful scene. He clicked his tongue. "I could have sworn it was something beginning with Al. It's this malaria of mine. Picked it up in Equatorial Africa, and it affects my memory. So, you've changed your name, have you? Secret enemies after you? No secret enemies. That's generally why one changes one's name. I had to change mine that time I shot the chief of the Macombies. In self-defense, of course, but that made no difference to his widows and surviving relatives who were looking for me. If they had caught me, they would have roasted me alive over a slow fire, which is a thing one always wants to avoid. But I baffled them. Plank was the man they were trying to contact, and it never occurred to them that somebody called George Bernard Shaw could be the chap they were after. They're not very bright in those parts. Well, Wooster, how have you been since last we met? Pretty bobbish?
Oh, fine, thanks, except that I've got spots on my chest.
Spots? That's bad. How many?
I said I'd not actually taken a census, but there were quite a few, and he shook his head gravely.
Might be bubonic plague, or possibly sprue, or histosomiasis. One of my native bearers got spots on his chest, and we buried him before sundown. Had to. Delicate fellas, these native bearers. Though you wouldn't think so to look at them. Catch everything that's going around. Sprue, bubonic plague, histosomiasis, jungle fever, colds in the head. The lot. Well, Wooster, it's been nice seeing you again. I would ask you to lunch, but I have a train to catch. I'm off to the country.
He left me, as you may imagine, in something of a twitter. Bertram Wooster, as is well known, is intrepid, and it takes a lot to scare the pants off him. But his talk of native bearers who had to be buried before sundown had caused me not a little anxiety. Nor did the first sight of E. Jimpson Murgatroyd do anything to put me at my ease. Tipton had warned me that he was a gloomy old buster, and a gloomy old buster was what he proved to be. He had sad, brooding eyes and long whiskers, and his resemblance to a frog, which had been looking on the dark side since it was a slip of a tadpole, sent my spirits right down into the basement. However, as so often happens when you get to know a fellow better, he turned out to be not nearly as pessimistic a God-helpers as he appeared to be at first sight. By the time he'd weighed me and tied that rubber thing round my biceps, and felt my pulse and tapped me all over like a whiskered woodpecker, he'd quite brightened up, and words of good cheer were pouring out of him like ginger beer from a bottle.
"I don't think you have much to worry about," he said.
"You don't?" I said, considerably bucked up. "Then it isn't sprue or histosomiasis?"
"Of course it's not. What gave you the idea it might be?"
"Major Plank said it might. The chap who was in here before me."
"You shouldn't listen to people, especially Plank. We were at school together. Balmy Plank, we used to call him. No, the spots have no importance. They will disappear in a few days."
"Well, that's a relief," I said, and he said he was glad I was pleased. "But," he added, this chipped a bit off my joie de vivre. "But what?" He was looking like a minor prophet about to rebuke the sins of the people. It was the whiskers that did it mostly, though the eyebrows helped. I forgot to mention that he had bushy eyebrows, and I could see that this was where I got the bad news.
"Mr. Wooster," he said, "you're a typical young man about town."
"Oh, thanks," I responded, for it sounded like a compliment, and one always likes to say the civil thing.
"And like all you young men of your type, you pay no attention to your health. You drink too much."
"Well, only at times of special revelry. Last night, for instance, I was helping a pal to celebrate the happy conclusion of love's young dream, and it may be that I became a mite polluted, but that rarely happens. One martini Wooster, some people call me." He paid no attention to my frank, manly statement, but carried on regardless.
"You smoke too much. You stay up too late at night. You don't get enough exercise. At your age, you ought to be playing rugby football for the old boys of your school."
I didn't go to a ruggers school."
"Where did you go?"
"Eton."
"Oh,"
he said, and he said it as if he didn't think much of Eton.
"Well, there you are. You do all the things I've said. You abuse your health in 100 ways. Total collapse may come at any moment."
"At any moment?" I quavered.
"At any moment. Unless—"
"Unless?" Now I felt he was talking.
"Unless you give up this unwholesome London life, and go to the country, breathe pure air, go to bed early, and get plenty of exercise. If you do not do this, I cannot answer for the consequences."
He had shaken me, When a doctor, even if whiskered, tells you he cannot answer for the consequences, that's strong stuff. But I was not dismayed, because I'd spotted a way of following his advice without anguish. Bertie Wooster is like that. He thinks on his feet. "Oh, would it be all right," I asked, "if I went to stay with my aunt in Worcestershire?" He weighed the question, scratching his nose with his stethoscope. He had been doing this at intervals during our get-together, being evidently one of the scratchers, like Barbara Frietchie. The poet Nash would have taken to him. "I see no objection to your staying with your aunt, provided the conditions are right. Whereabouts in Worcestershire does she live?" "Near a town called Market Snodsbury." "Is the air pure there?" "Excursion trains are run for people to breathe it." "Your life would be quiet?" "Practically unconscious." "No late hours?" "None. At the early dinner, the restful spell with a good book or the crossword puzzle, and so to bed." "Then by all means do as you suggest." "Splendid. I'll ring her up right away." The aunt to whom I alluded was my good and deserving Aunt Dahlia, not to be confused with my Aunt Agatha, who eats broken bottles and is strongly suspected of turning into a werewolf at the time of the full moon. Aunt Dahlia is as good a sort as ever said tally-ho to a fox, which she frequently did in her younger days when out with the Quorn or Pitchley. If she ever turned into a werewolf, it would be one of those jolly, breezy werewolves whom it is a pleasure to know. It was very satisfactory that he'd given me the green light, without probing further. For an extended quiz might have revealed that Aunt Dahlia has a French cook who defies competition, and I need scarcely explain that the first thing a doctor does when you tell him you're going to a house where there's a French cook is to put you on a diet. "And then that's that," I said, all buck and joviality. "Many thanks for your sympathetic cooperation. Lovely weather we're having, are we not? Good morning, good morning, good morning." And I slipped him a purse of gold and went off to phone Aunt Dahlia. I had given up all idea of driving to Brighton for lunch. I had stern work before me, viz. Cadging an invitation from this aunt, sometimes a tricky task. In her darker moods, when some domestic upheaval is troubling her, she has been known to ask me if I have a home of my own, and if I have, why the hell I don't stay in it. I got her, after the delays inseparable from telephoning a remote hamlet, like Market Snodsbury, where the operators are recruited exclusively from the Worcestershire branch of the Jukes family. "Hello, aged relative," I began, as suavely as I could manage. "Hello to you, you young blot on Western civilization," she responded, in the ringing tones with which she'd once rebuked hounds for taking time off to chase rabbits. "What's on your mind, if any? Talk quick, 'cause I'm packing." I didn't like the sound of this. "Packing?" I said. "You going somewhere?" "Yes, to Somerset, to stay with friends of mine, the Briscoes." "Oh, curses." "Why?" "I was hoping I might come to you for a short visit." "Well, sucks to you, young Bertie, you can't, unless you'd like to rally round and keep Tom company." I hummed at this. I am very fond of Uncle Tom, but the idea of being cooped up alone with him in his cabin didn't appeal to me. He collects old silver, and is apt to hold you with a glittering eye and talk your head off about sconces and foliations and gadroon borders, and my interest in these is what you might call tepid. "No," I said. "Thanks for the kind invitation, but I think I'll take a cottage somewhere." Her next words showed that she'd failed to grasp the gist. "What is all this?" she queried. "I don't get it. Why have you got to go anywhere? Are you on the run from the police?" "Doctor's orders." "What are you talking about? You've always been as fit as 10 fiddles." "Until this morning, when spots appeared on my chest." "Spots?" "Pink." "Probably leprosy." "The doc thinks not. His view is that they're caused by my being a typical young man about town who doesn't go to bed early enough. He says I must leg it to the country and breathe pure air. So I shall need a cottage." "With honeysuckle climbing over the door, and old Mr. Moon peeping in through the window?" "Yeah, that sort of thing. Any idea how one sets about getting a cottage of that description?" "I'll find you one. Jimmy Briscoe has dozens. And Maiden Eggersford, where he lives, is not far from the popular seaside resort of Bridmouth-on-Sea, notorious for its invigorating air. Corpses at Bridmouth-on-Sea leap from their biers and dance round the maypole." "Sounds good."
I'll drop you a line when I've got the cottage. You'll like Maiden Eggsford. Jimmy has a racing stable, and there's a big meeting coming on soon at Bridmouth. So you'll have not only pure air, but entertainment. One of Jimmy's horses is running, and most of the wise money is on it, though there is a school of thought that maintains that danger is to be expected from a horse belonging to a Mr. Cook. And now, for heaven's sake, get off the wire. I'm busy. So far, I said to myself as I put back the receiver, so gee. I would have preferred, of course, to be going to the aged relative's home, where Anatole, her superb chef, dished up his mouth-waterers. But we Woosters can rough it, and life in a country cottage with the aged R just around the corner would be a very different thing from a county C, without her to come through with conversation calculated to instruct, elevate, and amuse. All that remained now was to break the news to Jeeves, and I rather shrank from that prospect. You see, we'd practically settled on a visit to New York, and I knew he was looking forward to it. I don't know what he does in New York, but whatever it is, it's something he gets a big kick out of, and disappointment, I feared, would be inevitable. "Jeeves," I said, when I'd returned to the Worcester GHQ, "I'm afraid I have bad news." "Indeed, sir? I am sorry to hear that." One of his eyebrows had risen about 1/8 of an inch, and I knew he was deeply stirred, because I'd rarely seen him raise an eyebrow more than 1/16 of an inch. He had, of course, leaped to the conclusion that I was about to tell him that the medicine man had given me 3 months to live, or possibly 2. Dr. Murgatroyd's diagnosis was not encouraging. I hastened to relieve his apprehensions. Yes, as a matter of fact, it was. Most encouraging, he said the spots, qua spots. Is it qua? Perfectly correct, sir. His verdict was that the spots, qua spots, didn't amount to a row of beans and could be disregarded. They will pass by me like the idle wind, which I respect not. Extremely gratifying, sir. Extremely, as you say. But pause before you go out and dance in the streets, because there's more to come. It was to this that I was alluding when I said I had bad news. I've got to withdraw to the country and lead a quiet life. He says if I don't, he cannot answer for the consequences. So I'm afraid New York is off. It must have been a severe blow, but he bore it with the easy nonchalance of a Red Indian at the stake. Not a cry escaped him, merely an "Indeed, sir." And I tried to point out the bright side. "It's a disappointment for you, but it's probably an excellent thing. Everybody in New York is getting mugged these days, or shot by youths. And being mugged and shot by youths doesn't do a fellow any good. We shall avoid all that sort of thing at Maiden Eggsford." "Sir?" "Down in Somerset. Aunt Dahlia is visiting friends there and is going to get me a cottage. It's near Bridmouth-on-Sea. Have you ever been to Bridmouth?" "Frequently, sir, in my boyhood, and I know Maiden Eggsford well. An aunt of mine lives there." "And an aunt of mine is going there. What a coincidence!" I spoke blithely, for this obviously made everything hotsy-totsy. He'd probably been looking on, beetling off to the country as going into the wilderness, and the ecstasy of finding that the first thing he would set eyes on would be a loved aunt must have been terrific. So that was that. Having got the bad news broken, I felt at liberty to turn the conversation to other topics, and I thought he would be interested in hearing about my encounter with Plank. "I got a shock at the docks, Jeeves." "Indeed, sir." "Do you remember Major Plank?" "The name seems vaguely familiar, sir, but only vaguely." "Well, throw the mind back. The explorer bloke who accused me of trying to chisel him out of £5, and was going to call the police, and you came along and said you were Inspector Witherspoon of Scotland Yard, and that I was a notorious crook whom you'd been after for ages, and I was known as Alpine Joe because I always wore an alpine hat. And you took me away." "Ah, yes, sir, I remember now." "I ran into him this morning. He remembered my face, but nothing more, except that he said he knew my name began with Al." "A most unnerving experience, sir." "Yes, it rattled me more than somewhat. It's a great relief to think that I shall never see him again." "I can readily understand your feelings, sir." In due course, Aunt Dahlia rang to say that she'd got a cottage for me, and to let her know what day I would be arriving. And so began what I suppose my biographers will refer to as the Maiden Eggsford horror, or possibly the curious case of the cat which kept popping up when least expected. Chapter 4. I left for Maiden Eggersford a couple of days later in the old two-seater. Jeeves had gone on ahead with the luggage and would be there to greet me on my arrival, no doubt all braced and refreshed from communing with his aunt. It was in jocund mood that I set forth. There were rather more astigmatic loonies sharing the road with me than I could have wished, but that did nothing to diminish my euphoria, as I have heard it called. The weather couldn't have been better, blue skies and sunshine all over the place, and to put the frosting on the cake, E. Jimpson Murgatroyd had been 100% right about the spots. They'd completely disappeared, leaving not a trace behind, and the skin on my chest was back to its normal alabaster. I reached Journey's End at about the hour of the evening cocktail, and got my first glimpse of the rural haven, which was to be the Wooster home, for I didn't know how long. Well, I had a sort of idea that there would be what they call subtle but well-marked differences between Maiden Eggersford and such resorts as Paris and Monte Carlo, and a glance told me I had not erred. It was one of those villages where there isn't much to do except walk down the main street and look at the Jubilee watering trough, and then walk up the main street and look at the Jubilee watering trough from the other side. E. Jimpson Murgatroyd would have been all for it. "Oh, boy," I could hear him saying, "this is the stuff to give the typical young man about town." The air, as far as I could tell from the first few puffs, seemed about as pure as could be expected, and I looked forward to a healthful and invigorating stay. The only thing wrong with the place was that it appeared to be haunted, for as I alighted from the car I distinctly saw the phantasm, or wraith, of Major Plank. It was coming out of the local inn, the Goose and Grasshopper, and as I gazed at it with bulging eyes, it vanished round a corner, leaving me, I need scarcely say, in something of a twitter. I'm not, as I mentioned earlier, a fussy man, but nobody likes to have spectres horsing around, and for a while my jocund mood became a bit blue about the edges. I speedily pulled myself together. 'Twas but a momentary illusion, I said to myself. I reasoned the thing out. If Plank had come to a sticky end since I'd seen him last, and had started on a haunting career, I said to myself, why should he be haunting Maiden Eggersford when the whole of equatorial Africa was open to him? He would be much happier scaring the daylights out of natives whom he had cause to dislike. The widows and surviving relatives of the late chief of the Magombes, for instance. Fortified by these reflections, I went into the cottage. A glance told me it was all right. I think it must have been built for an artist or somebody like that, for it had all the modern cons, including electric light and the telephone, being in fact more a desirable bijou residence than a cottage. Jeeves was there, and he brought me a much-needed refresher, in deference to E. Jimpson Murgatroyd, a dry ginger ale. Sipping it, I decided to confide in him, for in spite of the clarity with which I had reasoned with myself, I was still not altogether convinced that what I had seen had not been a phantom. True, it had looked solid enough, but I believe the best ghosts often do. "Most extraordinary thing, Jeeves," I said. "I could have sworn I saw Major Plank coming out of the pub just now." "No doubt you did, sir. Major Plank would be quite likely to come to the village. He is the guest of Mr. Cook of Eggersford Court." "You could have knocked me down with a cheese straw. You mean he's here?" "Yes, sir." I was astounded. When he told me he was off to the country, I'd naturally assumed that he meant he was returning to his home in Gloucestershire. Not, of course, that there's any reason why someone who lives in Gloucestershire shouldn't visit Somerset. Aunt Dahlia lives in Worcestershire, and she was visiting Somerset. You have to look at these things from every angle. Nevertheless, I was perturbed. "I'm not sure I like this, Jeeves." "No, sir." "He may remember what our last meeting was all about." "It should not be difficult to avoid him, sir." Something in that. Still, what you say has given me a shock. Plank is the last person I want in my neighbourhood. I think, as my nervous system has rather taken the knock, we might discard this ginger ale and substitute for it a dry martini." "Very good, sir." "Murgatroyd will never know." "Precisely, sir." And so, having breathed considerable quantities of pure air and taken a couple of refreshing looks at the Jubilee watering trough, to bed early, as recommended by E. Jimpson Murgatroyd.
The result of this following of doctor's orders was sensational. Say what you might about his whiskers and his habit of looking as if he'd been attending the funeral of a dear friend, E. Jimson knew his job. After about 10 hours of restful sleep, I sprang from between the sheets, leaped to the bathroom, dressed with a song on my lips, and headed for the breakfast table like a 2-year-old. I had cleaned up the eggs and bee, and got the toast and marmalade down the hatch to the last crumb, with all the enthusiasm of a tiger of the jungle tucking into its ration of coulis, and was smoking a soothing cigarette when the telephone rang and Aunt Dahlia's voice came booming over the wire. "Hello, old ancestor," I said, and it was a treat to hear me, so full of ginger and loving kindness was my diction. "A very hearty good morning to you, aged relative. You've got here, have you?" "In person. So you're still alive. The spots didn't turn out to be fatal, and they've entirely disappeared," I assured her. "Gone with the wind. Well, that's good. I wouldn't have liked introducing a piebald nephew to the Briscoes, and they want you to come to lunch today." "Vastly civil of them. Have you a clean collar?" "Several, with immaculate shirts attached." "Don't wear that drones club tie." "Certainly not," I agreed. If the drones club tie has a fault, it is a little on the loud side, and should not be sprung suddenly on nervous people and invalids, and I had no means of knowing if Mrs. Briscoe was one of these. "What time is the binge?" 1:30. "Expect me then, with my hair in a braid." The invitation showed a neighbourly spirit, which I applauded, and I said as much to Jeeves. "They sound good eggs, these Briscoes." "I believe they give uniform satisfaction, sir." "Aunt Dahlia didn't say where they lived." "At Eggersford Hall, sir." "Well, how does one get there?" "One proceeds up the main street of the village to the high road, where one turns to the left. You cannot miss the house. It is large and stands in extensive grounds. It is a walk of about 1.5 miles, if you were intending to walk." "I think I'd better. Murgatroyd would advise it. You, I take it, in my absence will go and hobnob with your aunt. Have you seen her yet?" "No, sir. I learned from the lady behind the bar of the Goose and Grasshopper, where I looked in on the night of my arrival, that she's gone to Liverpool for her annual holiday." Liverpool, egad. Sometimes one feels that aunts live for pleasure alone. I made an early start. If these Briscoes were courting my society, I wanted to give them as much of it as possible. Reaching the high road, where Jeeves had told me to turn to the left, I thought I'd better make sure. He had spoken confidently, but it is always well to get a second opinion. And, by Jove, I found that he'd goofed. I accosted a passing centenarian. Everybody in Maiden Eggersford seemed to be about 150, no doubt owing to the pure air, and asked which way I turned for Eggersford Court, and he said to the right. Just showed how even Jeeves can be mistaken. On one point, however, he had been correct. A large house, he had said, standing in extensive grounds, and I had been walking what must have been 1.5 miles when I came in sight of just such a residence, standing in grounds such as he had described. There were gates opening on a long drive, and I was starting to walk up this, when it occurred to me that I could save time by cutting across country, because the house I could see through the trees was a good deal to the north-northeast. They make these drives winding so as to impress visitors. Bless my soul, the visitor says, this drive must be 3/4 of a mile long. Shows how rich the chap is. Whether I was singing or not, I can't remember, more probably whistling. But be that as it may, I made good progress, and I'd just come abreast of what looked like stables, when there appeared from nowhere a cat. It was a cat of rather individual appearance, being black in its general colour scheme, but with splashes of white about the ribs and also on the tip of its nose. I chirruped and twiddled my fingers, as is my custom on these occasions, and it advanced with its tail up and rubbed its nose against my leg in a manner that indicated clearly that in Bertie Wooster was convinced that it had found a kindred soul and one of the boys. Nor had its intuition led it astray. One of the first poems I ever learned, I don't know who wrote it, probably Shakespeare, ran, I love little pussy, her coat is so warm, and if I don't hurt her, she'll do me no harm. And that is how I've been all my life, Ask any cat with whom I've had dealings what sort of a chap I am, cat-wise, and it will tell you that I'm a thoroughly good egg, in whom complete confidence can safely be placed. Cats who know me well, like Aunt Dahlia's Augustus, will probably allude to my skill at scratching them behind the ear. I scratched this one behind the ear, and it received the attention with obvious gratification, purring like the rumble of distant thunder. Cordial relations having now been established, I was proceeding to what you might call phase 2, viz., picking it up in my arms in order to tickle its stomach, when the Wilkin was split by a stentorian "Hi!" There are many ways of saying hi. In America it is a pleasant form of greeting, often employed as a substitute for good morning. Two friends meet, one of them says, "Hi, Bill." The other replies, "Hi, George." Then Bill says, "Is this hot enough for you?" And George says that what he minds is not the heat but the humidity, and they go on their way. But this hi was something very different. I believe the sort of untamed savages Major Plank mixes with do not go into battle shouting hi, but if they did, the sound would be just like the uncouth roar which had nearly shattered my eardrums. Turning, I perceived a red-faced little half-portion brandishing a hunting crop I didn't much like the look of. I've never been fond of hunting crops, since at an early age I was chased for a mile across difficult country by an uncle armed with one, who had found me smoking one of his cigars. In frosty weather I can still feel the old wounds. But now I wasn't really perturbed. This, I took it, was the Colonel Briscoe who had asked me to lunch, and though at the moment he had the air of one who would be glad to dissect me with a blunt knife, better conditions would be bound to prevail as soon as I mentioned my name. I mean, you don't ask a fellow to lunch and start assaulting and battering him as soon as he clocks in. I mentioned it, accordingly, rather surprised by his size, for I had thought they made colonels somewhat larger. Still, I suppose they come in all sizes, like potatoes, or for the matter of that, girls. Vanessa Cook, for instance, was definitely on the substantial side, whereas others who had turned me down from time to time were practically midgets. "Wooster, Bertram," I said, tapping my chest. I had anticipated an instant cooling of the baser passions, possibly a joyful cry, and a "How are you, my dear fellow, how are you?" accompanied by a sunny smile of welcome. But nothing of the sort occurred. He continued to effervesce, his face now rather pretty purple. "What are you doing with that cat?" he demanded hoarsely. I preserved a dignified calm. I didn't like his tone, but then one often doesn't like people's tones. "I'm merely passing the time of day," I replied, with a suavity that became me well. "You were making away with it." "Making what?" "Stealing it." I drew myself up to my full height, and I shouldn't be surprised if my eyes didn't flash. I have been accused of a good many things in my time, notably by my Aunt Agatha, but never of stealing cats, and the charge gave deep offence to the Wooster pride. Heated words were on the tip of my tongue, but I kept them in status quo, as the expression is. After all, the man was my host. With an effort to soothe, I said, "You wrong me, Colonel. I wouldn't dream of such a thing." "Yes, you would. Yes, you would. Yes, you would. And don't call me Colonel." It was hardly an encouraging start, but I tried again. "Nice day." "Damn the day." "Crops coming on nicely?" "Curse the crops." "How's my aunt?" "How the devil should I know how your aunt is?" I thought this odd. When you've got an aunt staying with you, you ought to be able to supply inquirers with a bulletin, if only a sketchy one, of her state of health. I began to wonder if the little shrimp I was chatting with wasn't a bit fuzzy in the upper story. Certainly, as far as the conversation had gone at present, he would have aroused the professional interest of any qualified brain specialist. But I didn't give up. We Woosters don't. I tried another tack altogether. "It was awfully kind of you to ask me to lunch," I said. I don't say he actually frothed at the mouth. There was no question, however, that my words had displeased him. "Ask you to lunch? Ask you to lunch? I wouldn't ask you to lunch." I think he was about to add, with a 10-foot pole. But at this moment from off-stage there came the sound of a robust tenor voice, singing what sounded like the song hit from some equatorial African musical comedy. And the next moment Major Plank appeared, and the scales fell from my eyes. Plank being on the premises meant that this wasn't the Briscoe residence by a damn sight. By losing faith in Jeeves and turning to the right on reaching the high road instead of to the left as he'd told me to, I'd come to the wrong house. For an instant I felt like blaming the centenarian, but we Woosters are fair-minded, and I remembered that I had asked him the way to Egglesford Court, which this joint presumably was, and if you say court when you mean hall, there's bound to be confusion. "Good Lord," I said, suffused with embarrassment. "Aren't you Colonel Briscoe?" He didn't deign to answer that one, and Plank started talking. "Why, hello, Wooster," he said. "Who would ever have thought of seeing you here? I didn't know you knew Cook." "Do you know him?" said the purple chap, evidently stunned by the idea that I could have a respectable acquaintance. "Of course I know him. Met him at my place in Gloucestershire, though under what circumstances I've forgotten. It'll come back, but at the moment all I know is that he's changed his name. It used to be something beginning with Al, and now it's Wooster. I suppose the original name was something ghastly, which he could not stand any longer. I knew a man at the United Explorers who changed his name from Buggins to Westmacott Trevelyan. I thought it very sensible of him, but it didn't do him much good, poor chap, because he'd scarcely got used to seeing his IOUs Gilbert Westmacott Trevelyan when he was torn asunder by a lion. Still, that's the way it goes. How'd you come out with the doctor, Wooster? Was it bubonic plague?" I said no, not bubonic plague, and he said he was glad to hear it, because bubonic plague was no joke, ask anyone. "You're staying in these parts?" "No, I have a cottage in the village." "Pity. You could have come here. Been company for Vanessa. But you'll join us at lunch," said Plank, who seemed to think that a guest is entitled to issue invitations to his host's house, which any good etiquette book would have told him is not the case. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm lunching at Egglesford Hall with the Briscoes." This caused Cook, who had been silent for some time, probably having trouble with his vocal cords, to snort visibly. "I knew it. I was right. I knew you were Briscoe's hireling." "What are you talking about, Cook?" asked Plank, not abreast. "Never mind what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. This man is in the pay of Briscoe, and he came here to steal my cat." "Why would he steal your cat?" "You know why he would steal my cat. You know as well as I do that Briscoe stops at nothing. Look at this man. Look at his face. Guilt-ridden all over it. I caught him with the cat in his arms. Hold him there, Plank, while I go and telephone the police." And so saying, he legged it. I confess to being a little uneasy when I heard him tell Plank to hold me, because I had had experience of Plank's methods of holding people. I believe I mentioned earlier that at our previous meeting he had proposed to detain me with the assistance of his Zulu knob-kerry, and he had in his grasp now a stout stick, which, if it wasn't a Zulu knob-kerry, was unquestionably the next best thing. Fortunately, he was in a friendly mood. "You mustn't mind Cook, Wooster. He's upset. He's been having a spot of domestic trouble. That's why he asked me to come and stay. He thought I might have advice to offer. He allowed his daughter Vanessa to go to London to study art at the Slade, if that's the name of the place, and she got in with the wrong crowd, got pinched by the police and so on and so forth, upon which Cook did the heavy father and jerked her home and told her she'd got to stay there till she learned a bit of sense. She doesn't like it, poor girl, but I tell her she's lucky not to be in equatorial Africa, because there, if a daughter blots her copybook, her father chops her head off and buries her in the back garden. Well, I hate to see you go, Wooster, but I think you'd better be off. I don't say Cook will be back with a shotgun, but you never know. I'd leave, if I were you." His advice struck me as good. I took it. Chapter 5. I headed for the cottage where I'd left the car. By the time I got there, I should have done 3 miles of foot slogging, and I proposed to give the leg muscles a bit of time off, and if E. Jimson Murgatroyd didn't like it, let him eat cake. I was particularly anxious to get together with Jeeves and hear what he had to say about the strange experience through which I just passed. As strange an E as had come my way in what you might call a month of Sundays. I could make nothing of the attitude Cook had taken up, Planck's theory that his asperity had been due to the fact that Vanessa had got into the wrong crowd in London seemed to me pure apple sauce. I mean, if your daughter picks her social circle unwisely and starts clobbering the police, you don't necessarily accuse the first person you meet of stealing cats. The two things don't go together. Jeeves, I said, reaching the finish line and sinking into an armchair, answer what I'm about to ask you frankly. You have known me a good time. Yes, sir. You have had every opportunity of studying my psychology. Yes, sir. Well, would you say I was a fellow who stole cats? No, sir. His ready response pleased me not a little. No hesitation, no humming and hawing, just, no, sir. Exactly what I expected you to say. Just what anyone at the Drones or anywhere else would say. And yet cat-stealing is what I've been accused of. Indeed, sir. By a scarlet-faced blighter named Cook. And forthwith, if that's the expression, I told him about my strange passing lightly over my not having trusted his directions on reaching the high road. He listened attentively, and when I'd finished came as near to smiling as he ever does. That is to say, a muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, as if some flying object such as a mosquito had settled there momentarily. I think I can explain, sir. It seemed incredible. I felt like Dr. Watson hearing Sherlock Holmes talking about the 147 varieties of tobacco ash and the time it takes parsley to settle in the butter dish. This is astounding, Jeeves, I said. Professor Moriarty wouldn't have lasted a minute with you. You really mean the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle have come together and fallen into their place? Yes, sir. You know all? Yes, sir. Amazing. Elementary, sir. I found the habitués of the goose and grasshopper a ready source of information. Oh, you asked the boys in the back room? Yes, sir. And what did they tell you? It appears that bad blood exists between Mr. Cook and Colonel Briscoe. They don't like each other, you mean? Precisely, sir. I suppose it's often that way in the country, not much to do except think what a tick your neighbour is. It may be as you say, sir, but in the present case there is more solid ground for hostility, at least on Mr. Cook's part. Colonel Briscoe is chairman of the Board of Magistrates, and in that capacity recently imposed a substantial fine on Mr. Cook for moving pigs without a permit. I nodded intelligently. I could see how this must have rankled. I do not keep pigs myself, but if I did, I should strongly resent not being allowed to give them a change of air and scenery without getting permission from a Board of Magistrates. Are we in Russia? Furthermore... Oh, that wasn't all. No, sir. Furthermore, they are rival owners of racehorses, and that provides another source of friction. Why, sir? I don't see why. Most of the big owners are very chummy. They love one another like brothers. The big owners, yes, sir. It is different with those whose activities are confined to small local meetings. There the rivalry is more personal and acute. In the forthcoming contest at Bridmouth-on-Sea, the race, in the opinion of my informants at the Goose and Grasshopper, will be a duel between Colonel Briscoe's Simla and Mr. Cook's Potato Chip. All the other entries are negligible. There is consequently no little friction between the two gentlemen as the date of the contest approaches, and it is of vital importance to both of them that nothing shall go wrong with the training of their respective horses. A rigid attention to training is essential. Well, he didn't need to tell me that. An old hand like myself knows how vital rigid training is for success on the turf. I've not forgotten the time at Aunt Dahlia's place in Worcestershire, when I had a heavy bet on Marlene Cooper, the gardener's niece, in the girls' under-15 egg and spoon race on Village Sports Day. And on the eve of the meeting she broke training, ate pounds of unripe gooseberries, and got abdominal pains which prevented her showing up at the starting post. But Jeeves, I said, while all this is of absorbing interest, what I want to know is why Cook got into such a frenzy about this cat. You ought to have seen his blood pressure. It shot up like a rocket. He couldn't have been more emotional if he'd been a big shot in the Foreign Office, and I a heavily veiled woman diffusing a strange exotic scent, whom he'd caught getting away with a naval treaty. Fortunately, I am in a position to elucidate the mystery, sir.
one of the habitués with whom I fraternized at the Goose and Grasshopper, chances to be an employee of Mr. Cook, and he furnished me with the facts in the case. The cat was a stray which appeared one morning in the stable yard, and Potato Chip took an instant fancy to it. This, I understand, is not unusual with highly bred horses, though more often it is a goat or a sheep which engages their affection. This was quite new stuff to me. First I'd ever heard of it. Goat? I said. Yes, sir. Or a sheep? Yes, sir. You mean love at first sight? One might so describe it, sir. What asses horses are, Jeeves. Certainly their mentality is open to criticism, sir. Though I suppose if for weeks you've seen nothing but cook and stable boys, a cat comes as a nice change. I take it that the friendship ripened. Yes, sir. The cat now sleeps nightly in the horse's stall, and is there to meet him when he returns from his daily exercise. The welcome guest. Extremely welcome, sir. They've put down the red carpet for it, you might say. Strange. I'd have thought a human vampire bat like Cook would have had a stray cat off the premises with a single kick. Something of that nature did occur, my informant tells me, and the result was disastrous. Potato Chip became listless and refused his food. Then one day the cat returned, and the horse immediately recovered both vivacity and appetite. Golly! Yes, sir. The story surprised me when I heard it. I rose. Time was getting on, and I had a vision of the Briscoes with their noses pressed to the drawing-room window, looking out and telling each other that surely their Wooster ought to have shown up by now. Well, many thanks, Jeeves, I said. With your customary what-do-you-call-it, you've cast light on what might have remained a permanent brain-teaser. But for you, I should have passed sleepless nights wondering what on earth Cook thought he was playing at. I now feel kindlier toward him. I still wouldn't care to have to go on a long walking tour with the son of a whatnot, and if he ever gets himself put up for the drones, I shall certainly blackball him, but I can see his point of view. He finds me clutching his cat, learns that I am on pally terms with his deadly rival, the Colonel, and naturally assumes that there is dirty work afoot. No wonder he yelled like a soul in torment and brandished his hunting crop. He deserves considerable credit for not having given me 6 of the best with it. Your broad-minded view is to be applauded, sir. One must always strive to put oneself in the other fellow's place, and remember... Remember what? Tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner. Thank you, Jeeves. Not at all, sir. And now, ho for Eggersford Hall. If you ask about me in circles which I frequent, you will be told that I'm a good mixer who is always glad to shake hands with new faces, and it ought to have been in merry mood that I braked the car at the front door of Eggersford Hall. But it wasn't. Not that there was anything about the new faces on the other side to give me the pip. Colonel Briscoe proved to be a genial host, Mrs. B a genial hostess. There were also present, besides Aunt Dahlia, the Reverend Ambrose Briscoe, the Colonel's brother, and the latter's daughter Angelica, a very personable wench with whom, had I not been so preoccupied, I should probably have fallen in love. In short, as pleasant a bunch as you could wish to meet. But that was the trouble. I was preoccupied. It wasn't so much finding myself practically next door to Vanessa Cook that worried me. It would be pretty difficult for me to go anywhere in England where there wasn't somebody who would turn me down at one time or another. I've run across them in spots as widely separated as Bude, Cornwall, and Sedberg, Yorks. No, what was occupying the Worcester mind was the thought of Pop Cook and his hunting crop. It was not agreeable to feel that one was on bad terms with a man who might run amok at any moment, and who, if he did, would probably make a beeline for Bertram. The result was that I did not shine at the festive bee. The lunch was excellent, and the port with which it concluded definitely super, and I tucked in with a zest which would have made E. Jimpson Murgatroyd draw in a sharp breath. But as far as sprightly conversation went, I was a total loss, and the suspicion must have crossed the minds of my host and hostess fairly soon in the proceedings that they were entertaining a Trappist monk with a good appetite. That this had not failed to cross the mind of Aunt Dahlia was made abundantly clear to me when the meal was over, and she took me for a tour of what Jeeves had called the extensive grounds.
She ticked me off with her habitual non-mincing of words. All through my life she's been my best friend and severest critic, and when she rebukes a nephew, she rebukes him good. She spoke as follows, her manner and diction similar to those of a sergeant major addressing recruits. "What's the matter with you, you poor reptile? I told Jimmy and Elsa that my nephew might look like a half-witted halibut, but wait till he starts talking. I said he'll have you in stitches. And what occurs? Quips, sallies, diverting anecdotes? No, sir, you sit there stupefying yourself with food, and scarcely a sound out of you except the steady champing of your jaws. I felt like an impresario of performing fleas who's given his star artist a big build-up, only to have him forget his lines on the opening night." I bowed my head in shame, knowing how justified was the rebuke. My contribution to what I've heard called the feast of reason and flow of soul had been, as I have indicated, about what you might have expected from a strong, silent Englishman with tonsillitis. "And the way you waded into that port, like a camel arriving at an oasis after a long journey through desert sands. It was as if you'd received private word from Jimmy that he wanted his cellar emptied quick, so that he could turn it into a game room. That's the way you carry on in London. No wonder you come out all over in spots. I'm surprised you can walk." She was right, I had to admit it. "Did you ever see a play called 10 Nights in a Bar Room?" I could bear no more. Weakly I tried to plead my case. "I am sorry, aged relative. What you say is true, but I'm not myself today." "Well, that's a bit of luck for everybody." "I'm what you would call distraught." "You're what I could call a mess." I passed through a strange experience this morning. And with no further ado, or is it to do? I never can remember. I told her my cat cook story. I told it well, and there was no mistaking her interest when I came to the part where Jeeves elucidated the mystery of the cat's importance in the scheme of things. "Do you mean to say," she yipped, "that if you'd got away with that cat—" I had to pull her up here with a touch of asperity, in spite of the clearness with which I'd been at pains to tell the story just right. She seemed to have got the wrong angle on the thing. There was no question, old ancestor, of my getting away with the cat. I was merely doing the civil thing by tickling its stomach. But what you're suggesting is catnapping. It's as bad as nobbling a horse. But you really mean that if some of them to get away with it, it would be all up with potato chips training?" "So Jeeves informs me, and he had it from a reliable source at the Goose and Grasshopper." Why do you say Ha! Why do you say ha? Never mind." But I did mind when an aunt says and ha. It means something, and I was filled with a nameless fear. However, I had no time to go into it, for at this moment we were joined by the Reverend Briscoe and his daughter, and shortly afterwards I left. Chapter 6. The afternoon had now hotted up to quite a marked extent, and what with a substantial lunch and several beakers of port, I was more or less in the condition a python gets into after its midday meal. A certain drowsiness had stolen over me, so much so that twice in the course of my narrative the aged R had felt compelled to notify me that if I didn't stop yawning in her face, she would let me have one on the side of my fat head with the parasol with which she was shielding herself from the rays of the sun. There had been no diminution of this drowsiness since last heard of, and as I bowled along the high road I was practically in dreamland, and it occurred to me that if I didn't pause somewhere and sleep it off, I should shortly become a menace to pedestrians and traffic. The last thing I wanted was to come before my late host in his magisterial capacity, charged with having struck some citizen amidships while under the influence of his port. Colonel Briscoe's port, I mean, not the citizen's. Embarrassing for both of us, though in a way a compliment to the excellence of his cellar. The high road, like most high roads, was flanked on either side by fields, some with cows, some without, so the day being as warm as it was, just dropping anchor over here or over there, meant getting as cooked to a crisp as Major Plank would have been, had the widows and surviving relatives of the late chief of the Mogombys established connection with him. What I wanted was shade, and by great good fortune I came on a little turning leading to wooded country. Just what I needed. I drove into this wooded country, stopped the machinery, and it wasn't long before sleep poured over me in a healing wave, as the expression is. It started off by being one of those dreamless sleeps, but after a while a nightmare took over. It seemed to me that I was out fishing with E. Jimson Murgatroyd in what appeared to be tropical waters, and he caught a shark, and I was having a look at it, when it suddenly got hold of my arm. This, of course, gave me a start, and I woke. And as I opened my eyes, I saw that there was something attached to my port side biceps. But it wasn't a shark. It was Orlo Porter. "I beg your pardon, sir," he was saying, "for interrupting your doze, but I'm a bird watcher. I was watching a Clarkson's warbler in that thicket over there, and I was afraid your snoring might frighten it away, so might I beg you to go easy on the sound effects? Clarkson's warblers are very sensitive to loud noises, and you were making yourself audible a mile off." Or words to that general import. I would have replied, "Oh, hello," or something like that, but I was too astonished to speak, partly because I'd never suspected that Orlo Porter could be so polite, but principally because he was there at all. I had looked on Maiden Eggersford as somewhere where I would be free from all human society, a haven where I would have peace, perfect peace, with loved ones far away, as the hymn book says, and it was turning out to be a sort of meeting place of the nations. First Plank, then Vanessa Cook, and now Orlo Porter. If this sort of thing was going to go on, I told myself, I wouldn't be surprised to see my Aunt Agatha come round the corner arm in arm with E.J. Murgatroyd. Orlo Porter seemed now to recognise me, for he started like a native of India who sees a scorpion in his path, and went on to say, "Wooster, you blasted, slimy, creeping, crawling serpent, I might have expected this." It was plain that he was not glad to see me, for there was nothing affectionate in what he said or the way he said it. But apart from that, I was unable to follow him. He had me at a loss. "Expected what?" I asked, hoping for footnotes. "That you would have followed Vanessa here. Your object is to steal her from me." This struck me as so absurd that I laughed a light laugh, and he asked me to stop cackling like a hen whose union had been blessed, or laying a blasted egg, as he preferred to put it. "I haven't followed anyone anywhere," I said, trying to pour oil on the troubled W's. I debated with myself whether to add "old man," and decided not. I doubt if it would have had much effect anyway. "Then why are you here?" he demanded in a voice so fortissimo that it was obvious that he didn't give a damn if Clarkson's warbler heard him and legged it in a panic. I continued suave. "The matter is susceptible of a ready explanation," I said. "You remember those spots of mine?" "Don't change the subject." "I wasn't. Having inspected the spots, the doc advised me to retire to the country." "There are plenty of other places in the country to retire to." "Ah," I said, "but my Aunt Dahlia is staying with some people here, and I knew it would make all the difference if I had her to exchange ideas with. Very entertaining woman, my Aunt Dahlia. Never a dull moment when she's around." This, as I had foreseen, had him stymied. Something of his belligerence left him, and I could see that he was saying to himself, "Can it be that I have wronged Bertram?" Then he clouded over again. "All this is very plausible," he said, "but it does not explain why you were slinking around Eggersford Court this morning." I was amazed. When I was a child, my nurse told me that there was one who was always beside me, spying out all my ways, and that if I refused to eat my spinach I would hear about it on Judgment Day, but it never occurred to me that she was referring to Orlo Porter. "How on earth do you know that?" I said, or perhaps gasped would be a better word, or even gurgled. "I was watching the place through my bird-watching binoculars, hoping to get a glimpse of the woman I love." This gave me the opportunity to steer the conversation into less controversial topics. "I'd forgotten you were a bird-watcher till you reminded me just now. You went in for it at Oxford, I remember. It isn't a thing I would care to do myself. Not," I hasten to add, "that I've anything against bird-watching. Must be most interesting, besides keeping you, I was about to say, out of the public houses, but thought it better to change it to out in the open air." I said, "What's the procedure? I suppose you lurk in a bush till a bird comes along, and then you out with the glasses and watch it." I had more to say, notably a question as to who Clarkson was, and how he came to have a warbler, but he interrupted me.
"I will tell you why you were sneaking around Eggersford Court this morning. It was in the hope of seeing Vanessa."
I no-noed, but he paid no attention.
"And I would like to say for your guidance, Wooster, that if I catch you trying to inflict your beastly society on her again, I shall have no hesitation in tearing your insides out."
He started to walk away, paused, added over his shoulder the words,
"with my bare hands,"
and was gone. Whether or not to resume watching Clarkson's warbler I had no means of knowing. My own feeling was that any level-headed bird with sensitive ears would have removed itself almost immediately after he'd begun to speak. Chapter 7. These parting remarks of O. Porter gave me, as may readily be imagined, considerable food for thought. There happened at the moment to be no passers-by, but if any passers had been by, they would have noticed that my brow was knitted and the eyes a bit glazed. This always happens when you're turning things over in your mind and not liking the look of them. You see the same thing in cabinet ministers when they're asked awkward questions in Parliament. It was not, of course, the first time an acquaintance had expressed a desire to delve into my interior and remove its contents. Roderick Spode, now going about under the alias of Lord Sidcup, had done so frequently when in the grip of the illusion that I was trying to steal Madeline Bassett from him, little knowing that she gave me a pain in the gizzard and that I would willingly have run a mile in tight shoes to avoid her. But I'd never before had such a sense of imminent peril as now. Spode might talk airily, or is it glibly, of buttering me over the lawn and jumping on the remains with hobnailed boots, but it was always possible to buoy oneself up with the thought that his bark was worse than his bee. I mean to say, a fellow like Spode has a position to keep up. He can't afford to indulge every passing whim. If he goes buttering people over lawns, he's in for trouble. Debrett's peerage tut-tuts. Burke's landed gentry raises its eyebrows, and as likely as not he gets cut by the county and has to emigrate. But Orlo Porter was under no such restraint. Being a communist, he was probably on palsy-walsy terms with half the big shots of the Kremlin, and the more of the bourgeoisie he disemboweled, the better they'd be pleased. "A young man with the right stuff in him, this Comrade Porter. Got nice ideas," they would say when reading about the late Wooster. "We must keep an eye on him with a view to further advancement." Obviously, then, the above Porter having expressed himself as he had done about Vanessa Cook, the shrewd thing for me to do was to keep away from her. I put this up to Jeeves when I returned, and he saw eye to eye with me. "What are those things circumstances have, Jeeves?" I said. "Sir?" "Well, you know what I mean. You talk of a something of circumstances which leads to something. Cats enter into it, if I'm not wrong." "Would concatenation be the word you are seeking?" "That's right. It was on the tip of my tongue. Do concatenations of circumstances arise?" "Yes, sir." "Well, one has arisen now. The fact of these, when we were in London, I formed a slight acquaintance with a Miss Cook, who turns out to be the daughter of the chap who owns the horse which thinks so highly of that cat. She had a spot of trouble with the police, and her father summoned her home to see that she didn't get into more. So she is now at Eggersford Court. Got the scenario so far?" "Yes, sir." This caused her betrothed, a man named Porter, to follow her here in order to give her aid and comfort. Got that?" "Yes, sir. This frequently happens when two young hearts are sundered." "Well, I met him this morning, and my presence in Maiden Eggersford came as a surprise to him." "One can readily imagine it, sir." "He took it for granted that I had come in pursuit of Miss Cook." "Like young Lochinvar when he came out of the West." The name was new to me, but I didn't ask for further details. I saw that he was following the plot, and it never does when you're telling a story to wander off into side issues. "And he said if I didn't desist, he would tear my insides out with his bare hands." "Indeed, sir." "You don't know Porter, do you?" "No, sir." "Well, you know Spode. Porter is Spode plus. Hasty temper, quick to take offence, and the muscles of his brawny arms as strong as iron bands, as the fellow said.
The last chap you'd want to annoy. So, what do you suggest?" "I think it would be advisable to avoid the society of Miss Cook." "Exactly the idea that occurred to me, and it ought not to be difficult. The chances of Pop Cook asking me to drop in are very slim. So, if I take the high road and she takes the low road— answer that, will you, Jeeves?" I said, as the telephone rang in the hall. "It's probably Aunt Dahlia, but it may be Porter, and I do not wish to have speech with him." He went out to return a few moments later. "It was Miss Cook, sir, speaking from the post office. She desired me to inform you that she would be calling on you immediately." A sharp, "Lord love a duck!" escaped me, and I eyed him with reproach. "You didn't think to say I was out?" "The lady gave me an opportunity of doing so, sir. She delivered her message and rang off without waiting for me to speak." My brow got all knitted again. "This isn't too good, Jeeves." "No, sir." "Calling at my home address like this?" "Yes, sir." "Who's to say that although Porter is not lurking outside with his bird-watching binoculars?" I said. But before I could go into the matter in depth, the doorbell had rung, and Vanessa Cook was in my midst. Jeeves, I need scarcely say, had vanished like a family spectre at the crack of dawn. He always does when company arrives. I hadn't seen him go, and I doubted if Vanessa had, but he had gone. As I stood gazing at Vanessa, I was conscious of the uneasiness you feel when you run up against something particularly hot, and are wondering when it's going to explode. It was more than a year since I'd seen her, except in the distance when about to be scooped in by the police, and the change in her appearance was calculated to curdle the blood a bit. Her outer aspect was still that of a girl who would have drawn whistles from susceptible members of America's armed forces, but there was something sort of formidable about her which had not been there before, something kind of imperious and defiant, if you know what I mean, due no doubt to the life she'd been leading. You can't go heading protest marches and socking the constabulary without it showing. Hard, that's the word I was trying for. She'd always been what they call a proud beauty, but now she was a hard one. Her lips were tightly glued together, her chin protruding, her whole layout that of a girl who intended to stand no ranny gazoo. She reminded me of my childhood dancing mistress, except that the latter was way down in Class D as a looker, while she, as I have indicated, was the pin-up girl to end all pin-up girls. The thought occurred to me that in another 30 years or so she would look just like my Aunt Agatha, before whose glare, as is well known, strong men curl up like rabbits. Nor was there anything in her greeting to put me at my ease. Having given me a nasty look as if I ranked in her esteem in one of the lowest brackets, she said, "I'm very angry with you, Bertie." I didn't like the sound of this at all. It's never agreeable to incur the displeasure of a girl with a punch like hers. I said I was sorry to hear that, and asked what seemed to be the trouble. "Following me here." There's nothing that braces one up like being accused of something to which you can find a ready answer. I laughed merrily, and her reaction to my mirth was much the same as all old Porter's had been, though where he'd spoken of hens laying eggs, she preferred the simile of a hyena with a bone stuck in its throat. I said I hadn't had a notion that she was in these parts, and this time she laughed, one of those metallic ones that are no good to man or beast. "Oh, come," she said. "Oddly enough," she added, "although I'm furious I can't help admiring you in a way, I'm surprised to find that you have so much initiative. It is abominable, but it does show spirit. It makes me feel that if I had married you, I could have made something of you." I shuddered from hairdo to shoe sole. I was even more thankful than before that she'd given me the bum's rush. I knew what making something of me meant. 10 minutes after the bishop and colleague had done their stuff, she would have been starting to mould me and jack up my soul. And I like my soul the way it is. It may not be the sort of soul that gets crowds cheering in the streets, but it's me, and I don't want people fooling about with it. But it is quite impossible, Bertie. I love Orlo, and can love no one else. Oh, that's all right, entirely up to you. I must put you straight on one thing, though. I really didn't know you were here. You trying to make me believe that it was a pure coincidence? No, not that. More what I would call a concatenation of circumstances. My doctor ordered me a quiet life in the country, and I chose Maiden Eggersford because my aunt is staying with some people here, and I thought it would be nice being near her. A quiet life in the country can be a bit too quiet if you don't know anybody. She got me this cottage. You might have thought that that would have cleaned everything up and made life one grand sweet song, as the fellow said, but no, she went on looking puff-faced. No pleasing some girls. "So, I was wrong in thinking that you had initiative," she said, and if her lip didn't curl scornfully, I don't know a scornfully curling lip when I see one. "You're just an ordinary footling member of the bourgeoisie that Orlo dislikes so much." "A typical young man about town," some authorities say. "I don't suppose you've ever done anything worthwhile in your life." I could have made her look pretty silly at this juncture by revealing that I'd won a Scripture Knowledge Prize at my private school, a handsomely bound copy of a devotional work whose name has escaped me, and that when Aunt Dahlia was running that Milady's Boudoir paper of hers, I contributed to it an article, or piece, as we writers call it, on what the well-dressed man is wearing. But I let it go, principally because she'd gone on speaking, and it is practically impossible to cut in on a woman who has gone on speaking. They get the stuff out so damn quick that the slower male hasn't a hope. But the matter of your wasted life is beside the point. God made you, and presumably he knew what he was doing, so we need not go into that. What you will want to hear is my reason for coming to see you. "Any time you're passing," I said in my polished way, but she took no notice and continued. "Father's friend, Major Plank, who is staying with us, was talking at lunch about someone named Wooster who'd called this morning, and when Father turned purple and choked on his lamb cutlet, I knew it must be you. You are the sort of young man he dislikes most." "Do young men dislike him?" "Invariably. Father is and always has been a cross between Attila the Hun and a snapping turtle. Well, having found that you were in Maiden Eggersford, I came to ask you to do something for me." "Anything I can." "It's quite simple. I shall, of course, be writing to Orlo, but I don't want him to send his letters to the court, because Father, in addition to resembling a snapping turtle, is a man of low cunning, who wouldn't hesitate to intercept and destroy them, and he always gets down to breakfast before I do, which gives him a strategical advantage. By the time I got to the table, the cream of my correspondence would be in his trouser pocket. So I'm going to tell Orlo to address his letters care of you, and I'll call for them every afternoon." I never heard a proposition I liked the sound of less. The idea of her calling at the cottage daily, with Orlo Porter, already heated to boiling point, watching its every move, froze my young blood and made my two eyes, like stars, start from their spheres, as I have heard Jeeves put it. It was with infinite relief that I realized a moment later that my fears were groundless, there being no need for correspondence between the parties of the first and second part. "But he's here," I said. "Here? In Maiden Eggersford?" "Right plumb spang in Maiden Eggersford." "Are you being funny, Bertie?" "Of course I'm not being funny. If I were being funny, I'd have had you in convulsions from the outset. I tell you he's here. I met him this afternoon. He was watching a Clarkson's warbler, arising from which you don't happen to have any data relating to Clarkson, do you? I've been wondering who he was and how he got a warbler." She ignored my observation. This generally happens with me. Show me a woman, I sometimes say, and I will show you someone who is going to ignore my observations. Looking at her closely, I noted a change in her aspect. I have said that her face had hardened as the result of going about the place socking policemen, but now it had got all soft, and while her two eyes didn't actually start from their spheres, they widened to about the size of regulation golf balls, and a tender smile lit up her map. She said, "Well, strike me pink," or words to that effect. "So he has come. He's followed me." She spoke as if it had given her no end of a kick that he'd done this. Apparently it wasn't being followed that she objected to. It just had to be the right chap. "Like some knight in shining armour riding up on his white horse." Here would have been a chance to give Jeeves' friend who came out of the West a plug by saying that Orlo reminded me of him. But I had to give it a miss because I couldn't remember the fellow's name. "I wonder how he managed to get away from his job," I said. "He was on his annual 2 weeks' holiday. That's how he came to be at that protest march. He and I were heading the procession." "I know. I was watching from afar." I've not found out yet what happened to him that day. After he knocked the policeman down, he suddenly disappeared.
Always the best thing to do if you knock a policeman down. He jumped into my car and I drove him to safety.
Oh, I see.
I must say I thought you might have put it a bit stronger. One does not desire thanks for these little kindnesses one does here and there. But considering that on his behalf I'd interfered with the police in the execution of their duty, if that's how the script reads, thereby rendering myself liable to a sizable sojourn in chokey, a little enthusiasm would not have been amiss. Nothing to be done about it except give her a reproachful look. I did this. It made no impression whatever, and she proceeded.
Is he staying at the Goose and Grasshopper?
I couldn't say, I said. And if I spoke with a touch of what-you-call-it in my voice, who can blame me? When I met him, we talked mostly about my interior organs.
What's wrong with your interior organs?
Nothing so far, but he thought there might be something later on.
He has a wonderfully sympathetic nature.
Yes, hasn't he?
Did he recommend anything that would be good for you?
As a matter of fact, he did.
How like him?
She was silent for a while, no doubt pondering on all those lovable qualities, many of which I had missed. At length she spoke.
He must be at the Goose and Grasshopper. It's the only decent inn in the place. Go there and tell him to meet me here at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
Here?
Yes.
You mean at this cottage?
Why not?
Well, I thought you might want to see him alone.
Oh, that's all right. You can go for a walk.
Once more I sent up a silent vote of thanks to my guardian angel for having fixed it that this proud beauty should not become Mrs. Bertram Wooster. Her cool assumption that she'd only got to state her wishes and all and sundry would jump to fulfil them gave me the pip. So stung was the Wooster pride by the thought of being slung out at her bidding from my personal cottage, that it is not too much to say that my blood boiled, and I would probably have said something biting like, "Oh, yes," only I felt that a preux chevalier, which I always aim to be, ought not to crush the gentler sex beneath the iron heel, no matter what the provocation. So I changed it to "Right-ho," and went off to the Goose and Grasshopper to give all over the lowdown.